Hi everyone. So I'm actually trying something a little different. I tried to do this new moon solar eclipse video yesterday in the outside area of my apartment complex where I normally do these videos. And because of ambient noise and because I had a reading scheduled shortly after I was trying to do the video, I kind of had to abort the mission. And I thought I would do it last night, but then when I was talking to someone, there's a park I go to in COVID times, or just in general, I actually go to this park to, take a walk. And of course I socially distance and I've got my mask and everything next to me, etc. But it's a nice park close to where I live, and it's a lovely time of the day for me. And I thought, now that I'm actually at least set up in terms of equipment so that I can actually wear my mic and do videos like this, and now that I've actually made the decision to record these videos in advance before I upload them, let me try doing them in different locales every now and then. I can do them indoors, I can do them outdoors, depending on my circumstances. So here we are, we're doing a new moon solar eclipse in Sagittarius video. And the new moon solar eclipse was yesterday, December the 14th, 8:17 a.m. Pacific time. So it has already happened. As you guys know, I like to do my new moon videos after a new moon. I don't leave them to after 24 hours after a new moon has happened. Typically I do them the day of the new moon, but be that as it may, I'll trust that the timing for this is right for some reason. There are 5 things about this new moon solar eclipse in Sagittarius, that I'd like to share with you. And they become increasingly, I think, more astrologically specific, so to speak. The first thing is, it was a new moon. And so that would mean that heading into this new moon on Monday morning Pacific time, it would not surprise me if Saturday and Sunday felt extremely weekend-like. If it felt like if you dangerously sat on a couch or on a bed during the daytime, you would end up taking a nap, and if the energy was flat and contemplative. Now, the new moon occurred yesterday, and it would not surprise me if for various reasons there's greater energy to move forward and get things done. And when we talk about a new moon in the sign of Sagittarius, it becomes extremely important, of course, to know where does that Sagittarius sits in your chart, what house it occupies, and what that house stands for. Because insofar as this is a new moon, there's every likelihood or possibility that for some people, even within 48 hours of the new moon, and for some people, within a week of the new moon, new opportunities or an opportunity to tackle or take care of something related to the house where Sagittarius sits will present itself. If it's a new opportunity related to where Sagittarius sits in your chart, then it's going to be something you're going to respond to. If it's something existing that you get to react to, respond to, it's very likely that you'll be able to attack it or tackle it with renewed energy or a certain amount of renewed force. So it's a new moon solar eclipse, but the first part of this that we just need to accept and acknowledge is that it is a new moon. And so it creates that new moon energy that remains now for another 4 weeks till the middle of January. Added to that, the planet Venus yesterday also moved into Sagittarius. So that is always a helpful transit, and over the next 3 weeks, but insofar as it helps this new moon energy, opportunities, relationship opportunities, financial opportunities, luck, a certain amount of ease, opportunities with Venus, especially wherever Sagittarius sits in your chart, are likely to come in, perfectly timed along with the new moon. So that's kind of as I mentioned to you, starting for about a month and a half ago, even though the astrology of the time is taxing and challenging, the lunations actually have started to become really quite positive and really quite helpful, relatively neutral, and moving us forward into newer energy. So I did a video 2 days ago that I think is still very important. I'll place a link to that at the end of this video once I'm done processing this video about what the current astrology of the time is about, and this new moon solar eclipse very much fits into that. The second of the 5 things, of course, I want to talk about and emphasize is that it is a solar eclipse. And it is a solar eclipse in the new Gemini Sagittarius, on the new Gemini Sagittarius axis. Now, there are 6 eclipses on the Gemini Sagittarius axis, and this is the 3rd. So someone may rightfully say, how new is it really? It's new enough because the last solar eclipse, this is a solar eclipse, the last solar eclipse was in the old sign of Cancer, the Cancer-Capricorn cycle of eclipses being active since July 2018. And this second half of 2020, as many of you have heard me say plenty of times, is a handoff between the old Cancer Capricorn eclipses and the new Sagittarius Gemini eclipses. Where's the universe taking us? Where is change coming from? Where is growth coming from? If we have a story to our life, it's the eclipses most of all, with the Saturn and the Jupiter transits following close behind. I would say the Saturn transit second and the Jupiter transit third, that set the agenda for what our hero's journey, what the story of our life is really about and what it's really focused on. And so the eclipses are critically important. Both the eclipses we've had prior to this eclipse have been lunar eclipses. One in Sagittarius on June the 4th, important. One on November the 30th in Gemini, the first in Gemini. Out of the 6 eclipses, 4 are in Sagittarius, 2 are in Gemini. And even though the Gemini eclipses are the ones we're to lean into, and wherever Gemini sits in your chart opposite to Sagittarius is where your growth is going to come from, where your opportunities are going to come from, where your development is going to come from, a new vista. You know, if there's a hero's journey and you're moving forward on the hero's journey, you're moving towards the Gemini part of your chart. You're moving away from the Sagittarius part of the chart because the Sagittarius eclipses a release. But the sign of Gemini never gets a complete eclipse cycle, and by that I mean a solar eclipse new moon followed 6 months later by a new moon, by a full moon lunar eclipse. Gemini gets a full moon lunar eclipse on November the 30th, and then in the middle of 2021, it gives us a new moon solar eclipse, and that's it. In Sagittarius, we've already had one lunar eclipse in June. We finally have the only complete eclipse cycle. New moon solar eclipse, December 14th, 2020. Full moon lunar eclipse, May the 26th, 2021 in Sagittarius. This is the only complete pure part of this Gemini Sagittarius eclipse because as early as November of 2021, we have our first eclipse in Taurus. So these Gemini Sagittarius eclipses are really moving quite fast. And even though the overall influence is about a 2-year influence, it's still short and speedy. And by 2 years, I mean about April the 4th, for me, April the 4th, 2020 to the middle of, I would say till May 2022. It's still pretty compact. And it's unusual that we would have a second half of the year, 2020, where we're doing a relay between eclipses, and a second half of the year next year where we'd be doing a relay between eclipses from Gemini to Taurus, Gemini Sagittarius to Taurus Scorpio. Now, it is a new moon solar eclipse of release, and insofar as this new moon is important, the week before and after December 14th, the week before and after February 14th, the week before and after March 26th, the week before and after May 26th, are important in this narrative. The date of the solar eclipse, 2 months after a solar eclipse, 2 months before a lunar eclipse, the date of the lunar eclipse. You can, if you kept notes and you've been following along with my videos, the week before and after April 4th, 2020, and the week before and after June the 4th, 2020 could hold powerful signals. I just did this for myself. It is unmistakable for what it is that these eclipse cycles are asking us to focus on and tackle. And because it is in the sign of Sagittarius, it's a question of releasing something. What do we need to release? So we do have this duality. I said I had 5 things to discuss. The first is that there's a new moon, so there could be opportunities in Sagittarius. There could be opportunities to lean towards Sagittarius. The house where Sagittarius sits is more important than the sign, but the sign of Sagittarius is associated with authenticity, truth, integrity, who you are at your core, your connection with source and spirit, your true self, a remove from the fray and gossip and social interaction of a certain kind, a hermit-like removal and getting in touch with your intuition and your guides and your connection to God and spirit and your connection to your soul, your connection to your truth. Goals and calling. The more readings I do, the more it is unmistakable that things like goals and calling fall in a Sagittarius 9th house part of the chart. People associated with the 11th house, I always see it with the 9th house, actually. So this idea that somewhere we're perhaps being asked to now rely on our intuition and to become a little bit more removed and to tap into what is right for us and to move forward with this energy of what is right for me over the next 4 weeks and what feels right, and can I rely on my intuition to guide me? Yes. And to move forward is very much there. But at the same time, the duality is that the eclipse part of this new moon is an eclipse of release. Sometimes something physical has to be released wherever Sagittarius sits in your chart. If it's in the house of children, is it something related to? That's a terrible example. If it's in the part of the chart that has to do with the home, are you going to be asked to move? I don't always see that, but if it's romance, is it something, a romantic partner? If it's in the house of marriage, if it's in the house, is it something physical that needs to be released? A home, a job, a person. More often than not, it is an attachment to, what it really fundamentally is with South Node eclipses is that it is a set of patterns and behaviors that we have become so strong in and so content with and so comfortable in that it is a subconscious security blanket for us to operate a certain way in the Sagittarius part of our chart. And that needs to be released, because staying in that comfort zone way of acting, whether it is in the house of marriage, whether it is in the house of real estate, whether it is the house of a parent, a child, a partner, whatever it is, there is a way of behaving. It could be patterns and boundaries. It's more patterns. It's an attachment to comfort. It's an attachment to expectation. It's an attachment to how we want things to be and how we expect things to be that somehow need to be dismantled. And it's an attachment to the Sagittarius house, wherever that sits in your chart, whatever house that is in your chart. It's an attachment to some things there that feel comforting and strong and powerful and like you're ensconced or enmeshed there. But being ensconced and enmeshed there is not part of your journey, so it has to be released. When it comes to the South Node in certain astrological houses, the South Node is, the North Node is the head of the dragon, the South Node is the tail of the dragon. Really, in many respects, the South Node is the anus of the dragon. And we're talking about excretion. We're talking about excreting waste. And there's no polite way to say this. So the eclipses of release are about eclipsing something that have been done and digested and are waste. The challenge is that the way we live our lives, it's very hard for us to release anything. So the question, the mystery of the Sagittarius eclipses, of course, is what needs to be released? And it's a different answer for every one, depending on the house where Sagittarius sits. Is it a person? Is it a physical object? Is it land? Is it property? Is it a relationship? As I said, more often than not, the only common denominator that we know of is that it is something that is being held onto because it feels protective, whether it is an attachment to how you expect other people to be or behave, which you can now expect to be challenged. They may start behaving in ways that you are not expecting, and that forces you to release something. When it comes to South Node eclipses, the really key word is resistance. What are we resisting releasing, or what are we resisting doing that can bring a new order to the Sagittarius part of our chart so that we can move forward accordingly? The sign of Gemini is associated more with interaction and social interaction and communication and networking and, what is going on around you, gossip, chatter, sales, resumes, interviews, meetings, TED Talks, social media. It's a time eclipse-wise of leaning into being more plugged in to what is going on around you and releasing, on the one hand, more Sagittarian qualities. On the one hand, in the longer term during this time, one could argue that it is going to be important to, and this is where the duality and the contradiction sets in, that it is going to be important from a longer perspective to be here now and really pay attention to what is going on around you and to tackle that and to avail of the opportunities that present themselves that way, and to not get too isolated or rely on your intuition or bigger picture or spend a lot of time watching astrology videos or not to be in dreamland, but to be in action, especially communicative and networking action, and that is where your growth and development will come from if you're just to rely on the signs. As I said, the houses are more important than the signs. So if Gemini sits in a more secluded part of the chart, then what I've just said, it will not apply. This is a general reading. But at the same time, there's the duality of the new moon. So at least in the short term, over the next 4 weeks, there's nothing wrong with a little bit of isolation at the same time to check in. And it's like you need to make your to-do list with regard to what you need to tackle. And even if at this point in time, you're just like, I don't care about Gemini, Sagittarius, I don't care about the houses. If you look at my last video about the astrology of the time, it's a question of, I would not be surprised if now you have a certain amount of oomph and energy to move forward and start tackling things. The Sagittarius new moon eclipse is yet another astrological transit that sits on the side of forward movement while we are still wrapping up some of the older things till the middle of February. Look at my last video and that statement will make sense. So we have a full and complete cycle now from December the 14th of 2020 to May the 26th of 2021 in the part of our chart where something needs to be released, and that something is a security blanket of some sort. And in releasing that security blanket, or being forced to release that security blanket, or being forced to identify and understand and accept that you've got to release that security because there's nothing for you there, even if you want to hold on to it so badly, is, agenda number 1 as far as this new moon solar eclipse is concerned. And as I've already mentioned specifically, week before and after April the 4th, 2020, week before and after June the 4th, 2020, week before and after December 14th, what this new moon might bring even in terms of opportunities. And then we deal with February 14th, March 26th, and then May 26th, all of 2021 is when to watch for these developments. There is an acceleration. Typically it's a 6-month eclipse cycle. It's about a 5-month eclipse cycle, 5.5-month eclipse cycle right now. Of course, someone is working out in that working out gear and hitting it while I decide to do this outside. So that's item number 2. And the new moon solar eclipse, the item number 2 is the most important part to think on and meditate on. Where does Gemini sit in your chart? How do you avail of opportunities there? How do you tackle things there? How do you live in that space till the middle of 2022 in some ways? That's where your opportunities will come from. That's where you need to regreen the forest. Those are the grounds in which you need to play. Even there may be a sense of release. There's a sense of newness to be dealt with wherever the sign of Gemini sits in your chart. And wherever the sign of Sagittarius sits, there's some crap that needs to be excreted. It's not serving you anymore. And sometimes it can mean releasing something, and sometimes it can mean releasing an approach to something. For example, if it's in the house of children, you're not going to dump your children. But it could be that it's time to evolve certain aspects of self-care or childcare. And it will make sense based on your chart and where your chart is trying to go. It's time the kids are growing up, whatever that means, whether they're 2 or 3 or 10 or 12 or 18 or 55. So that's item number 2. Item number 3. When talking about this new moon solar eclipse, a lot of astrologers are focusing on the fact that there are 3 aspects that are related to this eclipse itself. One is that it is conjunct Mercury. The second is that it is square Neptune. And the third, and most excitedly that people are talking about, that it is trine Mars. I have a different perspective on this. To me, all these 3 aspects have happened before the new moon solar eclipse. And it's true, they happened before the new moon solar eclipse. I understand that Mercury is right behind the eclipse by 3 degrees, but it's behind the eclipse at the time of the eclipse. I'm gonna reframe that. The square with Neptune has already happened. Neptune is at about 18 degrees of Pisces. The new moon solar eclipse is about at 20 degrees. So the moon and the sun have already squared Neptune. Similarly, with Mars, they've already squared Mars. So there's an aspect to, even in talking about this, I am a little bit wrong about the Mercury, and I'll talk about that in a second. The bottom line is that when it comes to the square with Neptune, anything that we need to contend with that is either keeping us in dreamland or fantasyland, or anything that has to do with fraud and deception, has already happened within a couple of weeks of moving towards this Sagittarius solar eclipse, and may in fact have some sort of relation or correlation with the full moon on November the 30th, because at that point in time the square was approaching. Similarly, the trine with Mars, insofar as it energizes the new moon solar eclipse, has already happened. So in some ways the new moon solar eclipse has kind of a bit more of a blank slate quality, but it's still energized and it's moving forward. You may find that you now have the energy to deal with or tackle any issues related to deception, or if this is true for you, foggy behavior, murky behavior, gaslighting. You may find that you have the energy to move past any dreamy or lethargic behavior and get into action. This is true on various fronts astrologically. All the planets are moving direct. Chiron went direct yesterday. Only Uranus is retrograde currently. There's a lot of forward movement in the air. It doesn't matter if you're in lockdown. You know, you might find that things are moving forward a lot more now than they were in September, October, when things were not technically in as much lockdown as they are now. There are things that are trying to get finished up and released. We talked about this 2 days ago in the sign of Capricorn especially, and Cancer, and Scorpio and Pisces, and there are new energies that are dying to get birthed and are now well on their way with this eclipse in Gemini, Sagittarius, and Aries. Item number 4. It may be that the new moon's transits are more behind us and it's a more energized new moon, but there are 3 to 4 transits that are occurring that don't impact the new moon, that are imprinted on this new moon, that I think are important, and again are very energizing and forward moving. One, which everyone has talked about, or a lot of people talking about, is Venus sextile Saturn. I don't want to talk about a sextile. It's not that energizing, it's not that important, it's not that, you know, it could be that there's an opportunity to create a certain kind of stability in relationships, but the opportunity to create that kind of stability in relationships and contracts is very much tied to the next 3 aspects I'm going to talk about. Number 1, yes, Venus is sextile Saturn, but Mars is getting ready to square for the 3rd and final time in Aries Jupiter, Pluto, and Saturn. In fact, the order is going to be Pluto, Mars square Pluto is always tricky, Saturn, and then Jupiter. And this continues till January the 23rd. Again, I talked yesterday about the struggle between the old and the new continuing into January and even into February of next year. The new taking more hold. And Mars squaring Mars in Aries, a new self-motivated, desiring freedom and a pursuit of self-interest planet that has been such a catalyst in the second half of 2020 in enabling us and forcing us to go after what we want, even though it was retrograde in September and October, and depleted us temporarily of our energy and our impetus and our drive of vitality. That vitality is now back, and it's getting ready to square and tussle and fight with Capricorn energies that are seeking completion and conclusion, and that might be a little bit more resistant. Now, it's supported by the fact that by the time it gets to squaring Jupiter and Saturn will be out of Capricorn and in Aquarius by the time those squares happen. And Mars also by that time will be in Taurus. So this Mars square Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto not only completes and drives us towards greater freedom from an older set of transits that have been in place since July 2018, but also ushers in, amigos, after it moves into Taurus at the end of the first week of January and squares Saturn and then Jupiter in Aquarius, Mars in Taurus, ushers in a new set of squares that are going to be defining 2021, which is Uranus in Taurus squaring Jupiter and Saturn, particularly Saturn. And Mars is going to come in and act as a catalyst in that struggle between liberation and responsibility that we will really continue to experience, although with a very different lens and with a very different flavor. It's a different flavor of ice cream in 2021. but there is a tussle involved between liberation and responsibility that is very interesting, and I can't wait to talk about it in a future video. But the Mars squaring Jupiter, we're in that place. So this new moon solar eclipse again encodes that spirit of forward movement and finishing up the old and moving into the new. Even more relevant and germane to this new moon solar eclipse is the fact that Mercury, on the day of the new moon solar eclipse, trines Mars. So, the new moon solar eclipse, the moon and the sun trined Mars before the eclipse, but Mercury trines Mars practically on the day of the eclipse and on December the 19th. Mercury conjuncts the sun. So the Mercury solar eclipse conjunction, even though at the time of the solar eclipse Mercury was behind the solar eclipse, it is moving towards it. So this is what I was revising from what I was saying earlier. The planet of communication, thinking, cognition, somewhere our forward movement related to this new moon solar eclipse is a very dependent on energized, self-interested, self-protective, slightly combative, if not completely combative, communication. So, if there are activities from the past that require completion and conclusion that have a boundary setting quality to them, if these are, whether it is boundary setting and self-protection or combat, or whether it is the pursuit of goals, the use of communication, the presence of contracts, technology, writing, emails, talking, arguing, documenting, legalities to some extent, primarily in terms of agreeing to things and disagreeing with things and signing things, very much encoded and imprinted into this new moon solar eclipse. It is it's a communication reset, certainly after the 19th, and as Mercury starts to move further from the sun, it's time to start using communication to release what needs to be released, to approach things with new parameters and boundaries, to finish what needs to be finished, and to start what needs to be started, and to move forward towards what we need to move forward towards. And Mercury, the planet of communication, has a strong role to play, and in the trine, a positive aspect to Mars, the planet of our vitality, and the planet that allows us to go to battle, and the planet that allows us to protect ourselves, and the planet that allows us to go after what we want, the planet of desire. Romantically, it could be a new moon solar eclipse. Interestingly, Sagittarius is a pretty independent sign. It's a very independent sign. But romantically too, with Mercury trining Mars, I know it's lockdown time, but romantic affairs might find that they get a bit of a boost, especially if they have to do with technology somehow or communication somehow. Meeting someone around the neighborhood, or communicating with someone, or getting onto social media, or getting onto a dating app. I know it sounds ridiculous to even conceive of right now, but this new moon solar eclipse exercises its influence till May the 26th. So even that could be a factor. Okay, so we've covered 4 things so far, friends. Specifically, new moon in Sagittarius, with Venus entering Sagittarius shortly thereafter. Opportunities where Sagittarius sits in the part of your chart, a certain influx of breath and energy to tackle and treat the new moon in Sagittarius as a new moon in Sagittarius. Item number 2, it might be a new moon, but it's a new moon solar eclipse related to the south node. So there are also release energies, mysterious, fated release energies that could create resistance if you are not too evolved and can't use your intuition to see the writing on the wall. In some cases, the writing on the wall can be too painful to behold when we talk about energies of release, especially if we're being asked to release something that is dear to us. But more important than being dear to us, it's not just that it's dear to us. Remember, it is a security blanket. And you can sit in a security blanket only so long, but if you start to sit in a security blanket for too long, you will start to decay. You will start to fall apart. And it's very hard for us when we look at something as a security blanket or something that we love to really, or especially if it's tied to a way we are, or way of being, or comfortable way of being, it's very hard for us to let it go. It's very hard for us to see the writing on the wall. It's very hard to accept Spirit's message to say, this is not where your growth is, dear one. Right now, your growth is going to come from where Gemini sits in the chart, in the opposite part of the chart from Sagittarius. Number 3, as far as the transits related to the new moon solar eclipse is concerned, apart from Mercury starting to come close to the new moon solar eclipse, I'm not really holding the trine to Mars with the solar eclipse or the square to Neptune as anything that the solar eclipse is bringing. What the solar eclipse is bringing is our ability to tackle these, particularly for people who are dealing with issues of fraud and deceit. Go for it, tackle it now, because item number 4, the other transits related to, encoded in this new moon solar eclipse, particularly to do with communication and vitality, are present, strong, starting to move forward, and really starting to get us on an axis between individual sense of freedom and liberation and authenticity on the one hand, and the sense of responsibility in the other. It's not as simple as that, because Saturn, the planet of responsibility, is in the sign of Aquarius, the sign of liberation, and Saturn and Uranus and Taurus is in a very, very curious square in 2020, but I'll break that down later. I said there were 5 things to talk about. Let me tackle the 5th thing quickly and briefly. The new moon in Sagittarius solar eclipse is ruled by Jupiter. Jupiter is currently in Capricorn. Jupiter is getting ready to move into Aquarius in 3 days time at this point in time. Saturn moves into Aquarius today. Actually, at the time of the solar eclipse, Saturn was in the last degree of Capricorn, with Jupiter and Saturn getting conjunct. And when you look at the rulership or the disposition, new moon solar eclipse ruled by Jupiter, disposited by Saturn in its own sign of Capricorn, but they're both getting together to be in Aquarius. Again, you can't help but marvel at the fact that it accentuates this idea of releasing the old and embracing and moving towards the new. Capricorn is the sign that, as far as the old stuff that we're supposed to release are concerned, continues to see activity till the middle of February.